Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today, Speaker of the House Joanna McClinton joins us to talk about her legislative priorities for the State House. If you'd like to join that discussion, you can call us toll-free 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. We'll also take questions from PCN's Facebook page submitted earlier. But first, we're joined today by Berwood Yost, Director of the Center for Opinion Research at Franklin and Marshall College. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
Now, the October Franklin and Marshall poll was released last Thursday. Before we get into some of the specific data, we are a week away from the election. Can you set the stage for us? How would you describe the general outlook and main concerns of those that were polled?
Well, there's a lot of pessimism that we find in our polling. We've seen it really since the pandemic, and it looked like at one point maybe things were starting to get a little better, but right now, we see a lot of people concerned about the direction of the state. Many people say their personal finances are worse than they were a year ago. And when we ask people what the biggest problem is facing the state, the economy, which includes inflation and concerns about wages, all of that is at the top of the list of concerns that people have, followed closely, I would add, by concerns about our politics and our politicians and their ability to get things done.
Let's start out by looking at some of the poll data. For U.S. Senator Bob Casey's job performance, 36% of those polled gave him a good or excellent rating. And then later in a theoretical matchup with Republican Dave McCormick, Casey receives 46% to McCormick's 39%. We're roughly a year away from this contest. What should the candidates garner from this data this early on?
Well, I think that's just it. It's very early in the campaign season. Senator Casey has pretty solid job performance ratings the way we asked the question. In fact, if you look at his numbers in comparison to Governor Shapiro, President Biden, he's certainly ahead of where President Biden is in his job approval ratings. He trails Governor Shapiro's approval ratings, which are nearly 50%. But still, he's faring pretty well among Democrats, doing decently among Republicans, or among independents. And I think, at the moment, most people are not paying attention to that race. So David McCormick is relatively unknown. Senator Casey's ratings for an incumbent senator are solid. He has room to grow there as well. And this puts him actually right about where he was prior to his first re-election effort in 2011. So I would say if I'm him, I'm not too concerned. If I'm Mr. McCormick, I probably feel like I have a chance.
Now let's look at the job performance for President Joe Biden. 30% of those polled rated him as good or excellent, while 51% ranked his performance as poor. And then in another theoretical matchup, President Biden receives 44% over Donald Trump at 42%. What do you draw from that?
Well, two things. First, President Biden, his job approval numbers are really poor. They're below where recent incumbents have been at this point in their first terms. That includes former President Trump. So there's lots of people who have concerns about the way he's doing his job. And many of those concerns, I think, are tied to the economic performance or the poor economy as people see it in their own paychecks and in the rates of inflation. Because of that, this race is really close at the moment. As we saw in 2020, that was a very close election. It looks like we're headed towards the same sort of close race in 2024 as we had in 2020 if Mr. Trump and President Biden continue to make it through to the general election a year from now. If I'm the Biden campaign, I'm a bit concerned because at this point in the election cycle, you usually see an incumbent's job approval ratings start to rise as they start to tout their economic or their performance of their administration. His is flat. And there are a lot of traditional Democratic voters, younger people, people of color, who normally support Democrats who are not terribly satisfied with his performance in office.
Job approval ratings for Governor Josh Shapiro, 49% gave him an excellent or good rating. How does that compare with other governors at this stage in their terms?
Yeah, he's doing as well as any governor that we've tracked since Governor Ridge in the early to mid 90s. And so his job approval ratings at this point in his first term are way ahead of other recent governors. That includes Governor Wolf, Governor Rendell, Governor Corbett. So he's in a really solid position, and he's in a solid position because he does really well among Democrats, as you might expect, but he does even better than the president or Senator Casey among Democrats. He's pulling independents who generally think he's doing a good job, and even a sliver of Republicans who think he's doing a good job. So that explains his high approval ratings. It's almost a throwback to the pre-2000s, 2020s, and 2010s, when we used to have that kind of cross partisan support for candidates. So he looks to be in a very strong position at this point.
The poll also includes public opinion on several policy and particularly school-related issues. If somebody wants to find the entire poll, where can they go?
If they go to our website, fndmpoll.org, they can see the latest release and previous survey releases as well.
Berwood Yost, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks, Francine.
We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be back with more of the PCN Capitol Preview.
I'm Dave Williams, your host here in Pennsylvania Country Roads. Come join me as we travel throughout the countryside of Pennsylvania, places that you love to see, the people you love to meet, and of course, the many wonderful things that go on in our state. All this and much more every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. on PCN TV.
Experience communities in action through lively and in-depth discussions on Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs. Join host Chris Kapp and his guests as they discuss important and timely issues from around the state. Gain valuable insight as experts share their thoughts on topics that matter most to you and your family. Get inspired to make a difference in your community by tuning in to Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays right here on PCN.
Welcome back. We're joined today by Speaker of the Pennsylvania House, Joanna McClinton. Madam Speaker, thank you for joining us. Madam Speaker, can you hear us?
Good morning. It is totally mumbled on my end. I'm sorry.
Good morning. We appreciate you joining us this morning. What are your top legislative priorities for the remainder of this fall session?
Can you please repeat it? I apologize.
Sure thing.
It went out for a second. Good morning.
Good morning. What are your top legislative priorities for the remainder of this fall session?
Thank you so very much for having me, and good morning to everyone watching. The Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus is so excited to be in fall session right now. I'm here in the Capitol. We begin our day at 12 noon. We're here today, tomorrow. We come back in November for 1 week and December in 1 week. The goals that we have include unfinished business. We've been working very hard to put the needs of our neighbors all across the Commonwealth ahead of any special interest groups. So we've been working hard to make sure that we're supporting working families, that we are working to lower people's property taxes, better fund our public schools. We have some incomplete work left with the last budget, and we're looking ahead as we get ready to get into next year's budget, because while it's fall now, we know that next spring will be here before we know it.
As you mentioned, the state budget itself passed over the summer. Some additional measures were passed earlier this month in the State House. What is some of this unfinished business that you referenced? What areas of state funding need to be addressed yet?
So we definitely completed the first biggest lift, which is figuring out how much of the taxpayers' dollars are we spending and how are we spending it. The last part involved a technical term. It's called a code bill. That tells the state treasurer where to pay money for what purposes. And we've sent a couple over to the Senate. The Senate's not in this week. They sent us a few back. So we're going to work on those today and tomorrow and get those bills to the governor's desk so that we can wrap up all of the work we did for the budget. We were able to, in this budget, boost funding for public schools. We were able in this budget to provide universal free breakfast to students all over. We were able to get some good things done, but we recognize that there's a lot of hard work ahead because, as I said, we're in a 2-year session. It ends November of 2024. So we're looking to see where we can get the compromise and get bills across the finish line.
Let's talk about some of the specifics of the 3 code bills that the House moved earlier this month. First of all, the fiscal code is a bit of an omnibus bill. What type of policies are included in that?
So in our fiscal code, we wanted to make sure that we didn't just do a standalone. We did a few code bills. We did a fiscal code, a school code, and a tax code. In the tax code, we made sure to give everybody a tax break. Corporations get a tax break so that they can stay in Pennsylvania and jobs can grow, and working families get a tax break. We did child dependency care. So those who are hardworking and paying that expensive child care bill, you would get money back from the state. An earned income tax credit so that if you are at a certain threshold with your salary, you'll be able to get more money back from the state. Additionally, we did a school code bill. And in the school code bill, we worked hard to ensure that the full gamut of school options are on the table. The money we need for facilities, fixing our older buildings, the money we need for opportunity scholarships for those who are low income families and want to choose to send their child to a different school. And most importantly, our constitutional mandate to fund the public schools. We have a mandate in Pennsylvania's Constitution to provide every child with a thorough and efficient education. So we also made sure to include that as well.
So under the tax code in particular, 2 things that stand out that were of interest to business. One was accelerating the reduction of the corporate net income tax, and then another measure implementing new reporting requirements. Sometimes it's referred to as combined reporting. Can you explain why the combined reporting policy is sometimes deemed controversial by some?
For sure. So many times we see what's happening in other places. I know that the city where I live, our mayor worked hard about 4 years ago trying to get a big conglomerate to build their facilities in Pennsylvania and, did all sorts of networking and advertising. Come here, come here, come here. And sometimes Pennsylvania loses out to other states with more favorable policies. Delaware, New York, Ohio, some of our neighboring states. We see the chip manufacturing happening in Ohio where they are working with Intel to create processors. We want that type of business here in Pennsylvania. We are fortunate to have farming as our number 1 industry. We have eds and meds in every part of the state, but we've got to do more so that businesses can grow and develop here. So we wanted to make sure that the income taxes that corporations pay, and Pennsylvania is an outlier in our nation. We have one of the highest in the country. We want to reduce it, but at the same time, we want to make sure that any operating losses that are experienced in the business, that they can carry it over. And then when it's time to really pay, they're able to do a reporting that provides clear measures on what they made versus what was a loss, and that we are able to see growth and jobs, because it's all about making sure that there's a good economy in every part of our state.
You mentioned regarding the school code that schools got a boost this year. How are public schools faring in the state budget?
Yes, so public schools did well, but we have a lot more work to do. So in February, the Commonwealth Court told every one of us that Pennsylvania is unconstitutionally funding our schools. We rely way too heavily on property taxes. So that means there are some communities with higher property taxes where the schools are funded better, but it's the state's job. It's our job. And essentially, we are in debt to our entire school system about $4 to $5 billion. So while we boosted our special education funding, while we boosted our public education funding, while we're sending more money through the basic education formula, we have a lot more work to do. If it was a letter grade, it would be a C or maybe a D. So we've got to get our support up. And when we do that, that's going to help all of the taxpayers, because it's going to give them some cuts on their property taxes back home. So their school boards won't have to keep increasing it. And it's a really important priority to me personally, because in Delaware County, my constituents are part of William Penn School District, which was the lead plaintiff on the school funding lawsuit.
I'd like to remind our viewers, if you have a question or comment to share with Speaker McClinton, you can call us toll-free 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. Now, the Basic Education Funding Commission has been holding a series of hearings throughout the Commonwealth over the last few months. What kind of result would you like to see come out of this?
So it's very important that as the Basic Education Funding Commission does its work, that we can see what is the new formula. A formula was created in 2015 and it's been in place since then, but we haven't gotten the A letter grade we need on funding schools. All of our children deserve a great public school no matter where they live. Their parents shouldn't have to jump around to townships and boroughs seeking a better school. And as a result, these hearings have been going on for 2 months. They've been in every part of the state. We're hearing from school board directors, we're hearing from parents, we're hearing from public school teachers. In addition to the Basic Education Funding Commission in Harrisburg, the Pennsylvania House Democrats are working with the Pennsylvania House Republicans, both the Appropriations Committee, which handles the budget totally, and the Education Committee. They are also on a statewide listening tour where they're gathering facts, gathering data, and gathering information in order to make sure that we're ready in time for the next state budget to do what needs to be done to level out that funding, to make sure that schools are not getting rid of personnel and getting rid of counselors or librarians or specialized literacy tutors, whatever it is our children need in terms of support. To ensure that that happens, we have to do some hard work, we have to do some listening, and we have to also make sure that we have every proposal on the table.
Our first call today comes from Harrisburg. George, you're on PCN.
Good morning. My question for Ms. Speaker is, when money is allocated, hello?
Yes, we have you, George. Go ahead, please.
Okay. My question for the Speaker is, when money is allocated specifically for certain items in school districts, I mean, I don't think anybody's against funding as best we possibly can every school district in the state of Pennsylvania. But there was money allocated some time back for asbestos and lead paint remediation in schools, in particular in Philadelphia schools. I think it was tens of millions of dollars. It's been reported, I've read and seen on the media, that the question's been asked, what happened to the money, because the work wasn't done. So I'd like to know what happened to the money.
George, thank you for calling in this morning. That is a very important question. Interestingly enough, while we decide how much money is appropriated to all of our different priorities across the state, we do not have the oversight to govern and look through the books and check out the receipts. However, we have an auditor general that is able to do that. And it's specifically for the school district of Philadelphia in our city and county, we have a city controller that's able to do that and really examine what the numbers are and what they should be. So I appreciate you raising that point, because it is very concerning that, especially for me and my community, when we closed schools during the pandemic, it seemed to me like this is the ideal time to remove that paint, to remove any sort of asbestos, anything making our children sick. But when schools reopened, a year and a half later, it was still in too many schools. So it's unacceptable. Thank you for calling.
And is this issue, things like asbestos remediation and lead paint removal, is this included in the school code that was just passed by the House earlier this month?
So it does have funding to improve facilities. What we're finding, and we did a policy tour in the summer where we went to different school districts. I was a part of it. We went to some beautiful rural communities in Center County. We went to schools in Berks County. We went to Reading High School, which is the biggest high school in the state. We went to a school in the city of Pittsburgh. And what we're seeing and hearing from people who work in the school buildings, the administration, and the folks whose job it is to take care of the buildings is they need more workers. They need more people to do the work, and they also need more financial support to upkeep their building. They're all very proud of the buildings that they're in charge of keeping together for the students, the children, and the community, but they need more support.
Regarding that Commonwealth Court decision that you referenced a moment ago stating that Pennsylvania schools are underfunded, where should the increased funding come from?
Well, that is the $1 million question. We have to figure out, is there a new source of revenue for our schools? We are sitting on about $13 billion in the rainy day fund. So if we get a little of that money out, are we able to make sure that we're creating enough revenue so that we find it sustainable, so that we're not putting ourselves in a position where for 2 years we do a good job of funding the school, but then on year 3, we end up in another crisis financially. So that is the question. We clearly have enough money in the rainy day fund to right the wrong. We can turn the ship. We can course correct. And then there have been other proposals in the Senate and the House about how to create new revenue. Some of them include things like marijuana legalization. We've been in a process for years where we've had medical marijuana in Pennsylvania. It started officially in 2016. There are some proposals on the table. What would it look like for that to be expanded for recreational? Some of the states around us have already done that. Delaware, New Jersey, New York. So those are some ideas on the table. But the good news is we have money in the bank. For the first time in a long time, we have a lot of money in the bank. When Governor Wolf started in 2015, there were $200,000 in the rainy day fund. And thanks to his hard work, God bless him wherever he is in retirement, we have, about 13 billion. So that being said, we have the money to spend. We need the political will and we need the voters and the constituents to tell your senator, your representative, it's time to do this because it will give you a tax cut and that will be huge.
Is increased funding the sole solution?
Completely a big part of it. It's never one solution, but it's a big part of it. We also have to look at the policies. We have done some work to have teachers retained. We passed the bill. We're waiting for the Senate to pass it, where we said student teachers, they should get a stipend. How can you spend all of your free hours in a school building? So that means you can't have a part-time job. I worked my way through college, 4 years, 3 years in law school. I had a job always, but student teachers don't have the capacity to do because they have to do lesson plans at night. Then they have to go into school and then they have to go to their college classes. So we have other proposals to make sure that our education system flourishes. The second thing we have is a tax cut, which our governor, Josh Shapiro, proposed, which we think is a great idea for teachers, bedside nurses, and for police. We need folks to stay in these jobs and not say, oh, I can get a new job where it's different and it's less pressure, because if we don't, we'll find ourselves with a new challenge.
One of the points of contention during budget negotiations over the summer was regarding a $100 million school voucher program. Why was the House Democratic Caucus against this program when they represent some of the members, some of the constituents that would have most benefited potentially from that?
Essentially because with a new program, we can't start talking about it in June. We started our legislative session January 3rd, and we are happy to have conversations to shore up that any new program appropriately allocates money. You just highlighted a point that, money is not the answer when it comes to education. We have to make sure we're bolstering our public school system because that is our number one priority. Our Constitution tells us that our number one priority is providing a thorough and efficient education to public school students. So while we can chalk and chew gum at the same time, we already have school choice in Pennsylvania. We have a large EITC program. We have an OSTC program for poorer students. So the House Democratic Caucus's position is we don't need to create a third program when right now there's no checks and balances and no accountability for either the OSTC program or the EITC program. And sadly, the EITC program, which is the larger amount, benefits children whose parents can afford to pay tuition, frankly. And I'm sorry, but that's just not fair. I serve a district where 35% of my neighbors are living in poverty. So why would we be giving taxpayer dollars to folks who can afford their way into certain academies and other children are just waiting? The House Democrats continue to propose expanding the Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit Program, which does give direct scholarships to parents who are challenged with their financial income and who have lower wages and who do want to decide, I want my child to attend this academy and have a different setting for their educational upbringing.
Let's move on to another topic. Will the House vote on a minimum wage increase this fall?
So we've already done it. We voted on a minimum wage increase in May or the beginning of June, but I think it was May. And we did that because it has been a priority for a very long time. For all the years that I've been a member in Harrisburg, we were previously in the minority, meaning we didn't control the calendar, we couldn't call up votes, and I was definitely not in this office as the Speaker of the House, okay? So that being said, we've had rallies with workers, we've had meetings with organized labor, we've met with restaurant owners who are for raising the wage, and I was a server through law school. So it's a personal, important priority for me, for my district, but for the entire caucus. So we sent a bill over to the Senate that was staggering, raise the wage. You know, it start off at 12 and continue to get up to 15 by the time we get to year 2026. And we're waiting for the Senate Republican chamber to respond either to that bill or to send their own proposal. It is embarrassing that Ohio, West Virginia, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, each of them have a higher minimum wage. Ours has been stuck at $7.25 since, you ready for this? The drum roll. 2006. It's 2023. We know the cost for everything has gone up. And some of my Republican colleagues in the House on the floor said, nobody makes this. Well, if nobody makes it, let's be responsible lawmakers and ensure no one makes this. We want to ensure that we're keeping up with the economy and with the folks who are trying to get people to work for their different companies.
Considering that many jobs that traditionally would pay minimum wage, such as fast food, are already paying several dollars an hour, as you just noted, does the state minimum wage matter?
It does matter because we want to ensure that everybody is respected. What we have with our minimum wage tells everybody, stay in poverty. The folks in Harrisburg don't care. Live off of benefits because that's all you can afford. Because an average apartment in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, anywhere in the state, anywhere, is $1,200. You'd have to work 80 hours to be able to just afford that, nothing else. That's not food, that's not gas, it's not public transportation, just to afford a roof over your head, 80 hours a week, for a month. So it's outrageous. We have to do better, and we just have to set the standard. And that goes into businesses wanting to also be in a place where it's competitive and where there's growth.
Has the Senate given any indication of their willingness to bring a minimum wage bill up for vote?
Not yet. We are patiently waiting. And as I said, our session does not wrap until November of next year. So there's plenty of time for the Senate to do that. We remain open. We are not married to a number, but we just have to make it dignified and respectable for our workforce.
I'd like to remind our viewers you can join the discussion by calling us toll-free 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. We're going to give Speaker McClinton a brief break so we can tell you about what's coming up on PCN. Watch PCN's Halloween Select programs featuring PCN's coverage of spooky Pennsylvania stories and places, exclusively available free on PCN Select until Halloween. Join us for On the Issues. This week we meet two more candidates on the ballot in November. First, we're joined by Maria Batista, Republican for Pennsylvania Superior Court, followed by Tamika Lane, Democrat for Pennsylvania Superior Court. That's Wednesday night, beginning at 6. Tune in this Thursday as we air the Philadelphia mayoral debate between Democratic candidate Sherelle Parker and Republican candidate David O., hosted by KYW News Radio. That's Thursday morning, starting at 11. All the great public affairs event coverage and interviews you watch at PCN are now available for free online at PCNTV.com and on PCN Select. Thank you for watching PCN. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help keep PCN to continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Let's get back into our discussion now with Speaker McClinton. In light of last week's shooting in Maine that claimed 18 victims and injured 13 more, can you give us an update on the gun laws that the House passed earlier this session?
Yeah, so we continue to pray. We continue to pray for every family that's been impacted. It's just awful to see someone yet again have I don't know what type of challenges emotionally, but end up killing so many innocent victims. There have been over 530 mass shootings in the United States of America. There were 11 this weekend, Friday to Sunday that just passed. We have got to change the laws in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, especially. We know that in a few weeks, we'll be celebrating the beginning of hunting season. And I know that everyone talks avidly about not taking away the guns of lawful gun owners. And the Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus does not want to do that. We're not in the business of disarming people, but we are in the business of saving lives. There is no other nation in the world that continues to see endless bloodshed except these great United States of America. So the Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus was very proud a few months ago to send over two big gun bills with bipartisan support. The first of them is to end the gun show loophole. So for those who are buying rifles, assault weapons, long arm guns, that they would be subjected to a background check. Universal background checks are very important. The second is extreme risk protection order. My colleague in Delaware County, Representative O'Mara, sadly shared on the floor of the House how her father, a firefighter, took his own life after dealing with bouts of depression that even she as a child noticed. So what extreme risk protection order would do is if someone in our community was experiencing a challenge, a breakdown, serious depression. I don't know about you, but I'm not a doctor. I'm a lawyer. You would take that information, you would give it to the local law enforcement, and a judge would get that person evaluated. And temporarily, law enforcement would remove the firearms that person has access to. Between June and July in Pennsylvania, we were subjected to two heinous situations, one in Juniata County, where Pennsylvania State Police troopers were under siege by a gentleman who was having a mental breakdown. Sadly, Trooper Rousseau was killed. And then in my community in Southwest Philadelphia, about 2 weeks later, right before the 4th of July, on two nights, a gentleman went out into the streets and at random with an assault weapon shot at people. And it was very obvious that this person was undergoing some very bad situation. We ended up with 6 people killed, several others injured. And I see at community meetings the father of the gentleman whose son was killed through the front door. And the grief is just so heavy and it's so sad. If we had an extreme risk protection order, that gentleman in Juniata County who had been undergoing something for a while, and that gentleman in Southwest Philadelphia whose roommates saw some things going on and saw 3D firearms that were handmade ghost guns in their house, they could have alerted someone and gotten the help so that these incidents could have been prevented.
During the debate over these extreme risk protection orders, often called red flag laws, House Republicans had voiced some concerns that this law could be used against a law-abiding citizen. What kind of protections are in the bill to prevent that from happening?
Well, the biggest key is the evaluation. And that's why I started with, I'm not a doctor. I would not be a part of it. We would not be there. But a judge would decide, okay, you're going to now be able to be evaluated by someone who works for the court system, not someone who works for the person who reported you, not someone who works for the local police, not someone who works for the local sheriff, someone who works for the court system who's able to undergo an evaluation. And I can just share from my time as a public defender in the city and county of Philadelphia, when we needed someone to get psychiatric evaluations, they were neutral. That person wasn't on anyone's side. They weren't helping me or my client. They weren't helping the prosecutor. They weren't helping the judge. They were there as a professional to do evaluations, to figure out where people were and if they were able to be competent to stand for trial. So it'd be very similar. It would be a neutral party. It wouldn't be something that could be abused, because that is something we also worry about. But when we look at, and October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the number of families where someone is slaughtered, and sometimes, not all the time, a person also kills themselves. There were flags, there were red flags, and there were calls for help that were ignored. And we don't have any capacity right now in our law to be able to disarm these people. So it is serious. We want to save lives. We do not want this time next year for there to be another 535 mass shootings across the United States and 11 in one weekend and say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do because we want to respect gun owners. This is the only country where we live in this type of horror of violence. Nowhere else do you see nations undergoing this type of siege. And we have to accept it. And we have to really act on it.
Let's take another caller now. Karen is calling from Rockledge. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah. Hi, Speaker McClinton. Thanks very much. I appreciate the work you're doing. I was calling about. I know you spoke to the minimum wage, but I was calling to see if that legislation included ending preemption, so that, as an example, Philadelphia could raise the minimum above the state level. And did it also include the COLA, so that we wouldn't have to keep going back each year to raise the wage? So the two questions: ending preemption and the COLA. And I'll hang up and listen for your answer.
Karen, thank you for watching this morning and calling in with a question. So the bill that we sent does not end the preemption. It does not have an automatic COLA, although that is a very good suggestion on both fronts. The truth of the matter is, as you highlighted, Karen, there's some municipalities in the Commonwealth, especially with city jobs, with government jobs. In my city where I'm from, they've already, for city jobs, raised the minimum wage to $16 an hour about 2 years ago by a local council ordinance, just for the jobs that they control in the government. They don't pay less. They didn't do it for other people because they can't regulate it. It's up to the state. However, those are very good suggestions and something for us to consider for the future, because it would help in the stagnancy where we see, 17 years, no change in the minimum wage, and it could be some automatic elevator or escalator of some type. The language could be written in, especially if it was up to local municipalities to determine, here's what we can afford, here's what the companies in this municipality can afford, or this county can afford.
This past Friday marked the 5th anniversary of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. Since that has occurred, what progress has the House made in passing anti-discrimination policies?
So thank you for highlighting that. We remember fondly the 11 people lost and pray that their memory is a blessing. There has never been the attack on the Jewish community like there was at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, October the 28th, 2018. I remember being home that Saturday and at some point looking at CNN and seeing my colleagues, Representative Dan Frankel, who serves that community, at the time Governor Tom Wolf, and then our Attorney General Josh Shapiro, now our governor, on the news talking about the horror that occurred. Since that time, we have made progress in a few fronts. The first thing we did in the session that subsequently followed that awful attack on the Jewish community, the worst of its kind in our nation, is create the nonprofit security grant. Places of faith are nonprofits, and if places of faith are coming under attack, they need a little support from our state government. That money, we send a few $1 million every budget to the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. So whether it's a masjid, a temple, a mosque, a synagogue, a church, they're able to apply for that funding so that they can get support. I know a few places of faith in my district have been able to do it. They got better doors. They were able to get a new system, and it's important. We cannot take our safety for granted. Additionally, the hate discrimination bill came out of the Judiciary Committee in June, earlier, right before the budget. So we look forward to seeing that bill get across the finish line in the House and go over to the Senate. And some may say, well, what difference does it make having anti-discrimination bills? We have to understand, the Jewish community is not isolated in their attack, especially given all of the tragedies occurring overseas. Islamophobia is on the rise in Pennsylvania. And right here at the Capitol, 2 Fridays ago, peaceful protesters were threatened at gunpoint because of their faith and potentially because of their race. So that's a problem. We also recognize that members in the LGBTQ community are not safe. So we want to get that hate law passed, that anti-discrimination bill passed. It covers people with disabilities. It covers all types of marginalized communities. And as I said, it came out of the House Judiciary Committee. It's waiting a floor vote here, and we look forward to a floor vote in the Senate. And back to our last point, and we will have to not beat a dead horse, it also goes to trying to make sure that we have better, fairer gun safety laws to keep us all safe.
This coming Wednesday, the PCN will be providing coverage at the House Health Committee's hearing on potentially legalizing adult use marijuana. What's your position on this issue?
So it's interesting. It's evolved over time. I recall that being a question in the debate the summer of my special election, and I shared with my neighbors, I want to hear from you. What do you want? What do you suggest? Because I'm one person out of 60,000 something. And now in my position with the caucus, I've been able to learn from my members. What do they want? What do they support? And we have seen a great deal of our members be proud to support legalization, decriminalization, and I am proud to stand with them on that front for legalization and decriminalization of marijuana and making sure that it's safely regulated so we don't have to be concerned about children having access to it, and we don't have to be concerned, which is what I heard from my neighbors, of public use outside being a problem, especially when we live very tightly together in some of our cities. So we have a lot of work to do there. The medical marijuana program has been very beneficial for those with all types of different challenges, physically and emotionally, being able to get the support that they need safely. But we have a lot of work to see what would it look like and where would people be able to access marijuana should we change our laws here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And our health committee has been leading the front on that work. And we've seen different ideas from members of the Senate. Nothing has moved there, but we've seen co-sponsorship memos circulated. So we have a path to go, and it could be this session.
Adult use marijuana is currently legal in New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. It just became legal, I believe, in July in Maryland. Does what happens in neighboring states increase our General Assembly's impetus to move this issue forward?
I think so. And one more, Delaware. It happened in Delaware a couple months ago. It doesn't start until next year, but it just passed there after a lot of different debates with their current governor. I think so, because we have to be cognizant of what's going on regionally. And once again, whether we're talking about our minimum wage or our corporate net income tax rate, we want Pennsylvania to be as competitive as possible and a place where there's opportunity. And with marijuana legalization, that includes new jobs, that includes industry, that includes the people who currently grow and process for medical marijuana dispensaries have opportunities to expand their workforce and hire more of our students and more of our neighbors and more of our eds and meds grads as they create competitive products for people to support or choose to support in the marketplace.
Looking at more legislative committee activity, the House Judiciary Committee is scheduled to consider a bill that would completely eliminate the death penalty. Where do you stand on this issue?
That is something that we need to do in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. No one has been put to death in this Commonwealth for over 30-something years. And as a result, people are most often sentenced to life imprisonment. And there are still some, however, that are sentenced to death. And because no one is put to death, with all the mounting lawsuits and the habeas corpus petitions by different law offices, it ends up being a laughing matter. It's a joke because no one is going to suffer that punishment anymore. So we might as well catch up with the times and change our laws to reflect what the court system's decisions have been for 30-something years in this Commonwealth.
If this bill moves through committee, is there support in the House to pass this initiative?
There should definitely be support for that. Bipartisan, I would even say.
On another topic, Representative Donna Shuren plans to introduce a bill requiring at least some public disclosure of financial settlements, such as the non-disclosure agreement settled by the Shapiro administration in light of a recent top aide resigning amid sexual harassment allegations. Do you see this bill moving forward in the House?
Now, that is news to me. So I'll have to see what committee Representative Shuren's bill went in and where there is support for that bill. We definitely, and I personally am so proud as the first woman to be Speaker in Pennsylvania's House. The first full day at work, I changed the rules of the House to make sure that for the first time ever, members of the public, God forbid, have any negative interactions with any of our 203 colleagues, they can now report those incidents to the ethics committee so that an investigation can take place and a decision and recommendation can be made. So I definitely want to see that there is fairness, that there is support, and that any public taxpayer dollars that they are appropriately used for these types of incidences. But so we also have knowledge of what's happened and what has allegedly occurred or what has in fact occurred, so that we can be more prudent and have an environment where everyone is respected, especially right here at the Capitol.
In recent weeks, the House and Senate have had difficulty coming into consensus on whether or when to change the date of the primary election for next year. At this point in the game, is it too late to make changes for the date of next year's election?
So the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania have been consistently clear. I met with them in July and again in August, and they said, do not change the date of the primary. We, unfortunately, it's set in our Constitution for this primary, the fourth Tuesday in April. It happens to coincide with a high holy day in the Jewish faith community, and we don't want to cause problems. So we thought we could change it. The Senate sent to us March 19th. The county commissioners were vehemently opposed. They did not want it to be that early. They said it's not enough time for us to check the petitions. It's not enough time for us to get the workers. It's not enough time for us to secure the spaces for you to even go inside and vote. And oddly enough, it was right before or after, forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, the Easter holiday, which is a high holiday in the Christian faith community, which I'm a part of. So it's interesting. So we then suggested April the 9th, which we found out is a high holy day in the Muslim community. And then we ended up with April 16th, which we sent over to the Senate last week. They did not vote on that measure. So it does not appear that the date will be changing from April 23rd. And we do hope that with the preparation and the look ahead, that they're able to make sure that any members of the election board who are from the Jewish community will be able to make appropriate plans if they can't make it to work from, it's like 6 a.m. really to almost 10 p.m. Polls aren't open those hours, but by the time they get there, get everything set up, that they're able to make it work.
I'd like to squeeze in one last viewer question. This one came in via text. How can you justify legalizing marijuana when we have a serious drug use problem in this state?
That's an excellent question. We are one of the leaders in the nation for opioid deaths. We have to get with the experts. There are studies that show that a part of dealing with the substance abuse disorder of opioids, which sadly many times comes through prescribed medications from a physician after surgeries or incidents in which you've injured yourself. Many times suggestion is that currently medical marijuana helps to treat those symptoms and most importantly, treat the disorder. And that is why I said, we have to work with all stakeholders as we change the laws, especially for something that's currently a federal offense, a federal drug. We have to make sure what we're doing it right. But as you mentioned, several neighbors around us have done it. We know Colorado did it years ago. California did it years ago. Washington State did it years ago. So we have to figure out what is our cost benefit analysis. And if this in any way could lead people to more opioid use or deaths, of course not. But if it's something that will not do that and will continue to keep people safe, because you hear from the people who are in the community leaders say that it's safer than alcohol, that it's less addictive than any type of controlled substance currently, or they often go back to alcohol and how deadly and dangerous alcohol is, yet it's readily available and accessible for people over 21 to be able to take advantage and abuse it. So we have a lot of work there. I thank you for texting your question. I did not get your name, but I appreciate this opportunity this morning to be able to speak to so many neighbors all at once from the office right across the river, and look forward to being in person next time in the studio.
Speaker Joanna McClinton, thank you so much for joining us. PCN's John Cole spoke with Representative Casey Tomlinson about a bill that would post a crisis hotline in state parks.
What inspired you to draft this legislation?
So this legislation came about due to a story about a young girl from Ben Sound, from my district. I actually had passed a law in 2022 in memory of her called Lindsay's Law. And Lindsay was the victim of sextortion. In September of 2016, a young man Snapchatted her and asked her for inappropriate photos because he claimed he had already had other photos of her. And if she did not send them, he would post the photos he already had online. Unfortunately, Lindsay sent the photos, and the very next day she went to Tyler State Park and took her own life. So Representative Kristen Marcel and I thought that it would be a great idea if we could come up with a law that would require local parks and forests to at least display the suicide hotline for individuals entering the park. Because if there's even a slight chance that Lindsay or anybody else would see that and take a second to contemplate maybe not making the decision that they are going in there to make, if we can save one life with this, it's totally worth it. So, Lindsay is, very close to me. I'm a third generation funeral director. I did her funeral before I even knew I was going to become a state representative. So she's a very important person to me. And, we were able to pass a sentencing enhancement law in her memory last year. And I think this is just another way to keep her memory alive and remind people of her and her story and hopefully show people that there are other options. Regardless of how bad it gets, there's always another day and always an opportunity to make it better. And if this legislation can set that reminder for people, and it's just as simple as a hotline, the suicide hotline. That's all we're asking, and I call it no-brainer legislation. This is something that majority of my colleagues, if not all of them, can get behind, and this is the good kind of stuff that we really need to be doing in Harrisburg.
When crafting this legislation along with Representative Marcel, did you talk to other outside organizations to see how it would be best to go about it?
We did, and our feedback was like I said, it's no-brainer legislation, so our feedback was positive. We feel very confident in this. Things in Harrisburg can get super tricky, and it can be really hard to get things done sometimes. But when it comes to legislation like this, it's I think it's common sense for most people that why not? Why wouldn't we do this? And again, like I said, Lindsay's very close to me, and if I can do something to keep her memory alive and hopefully save another life, that would be, the ultimate goal.
Are there other states that have similar legislation?
I'm not aware of any other states that have similar legislation. Like I said, this is very personal to me, this story. I'd have to look into that for you, but all I know is in Pennsylvania, it's not currently posted. So something as easy as a sign at the parking lot, as people enter, we're not exactly asking for it to be all over the forest everywhere, but where people are going in, they can have a quick glance at that and realize that there is other options and help to be had. That's the goal.
So if your bill were to become law, who would be responsible for putting this up in the state parks and forests? Would it be the Department of, would it be DCNR? Would it be someone else? Who exactly would be responsible?
Yes, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. That's who would be responsible.
And if this bill were to get across the finish line, how long do you think it would take for them? Because, of course, Pennsylvania has a bevy of, state parks and forests.
Right. We haven't specified in the bill how long it would take. We would just ask that from now forward that you would make that posting available. And again, it's a very simple sign with the 988 hotline on it. I can't imagine that would take very long.
Where is this bill currently in the legislative process?
It's in the Human Services Committee. I've talked to both chairs. They both seemed very optimistic about it. And I have not spoken to the Senate yet, but I would hope that we would be successful over there as well.
Is there a specific timeline you think this may receive a vote in the committee?
I would love to see it done before the end of the year. Because like I said before, we do a lot of complicated things in Harrisburg. This is a no-brainer. So hopefully we can get this through the committee process, onto the House floor, to the Senate, and then on the governor's desk as soon as possible.
So I guess final question, Representative Tomlinson, are you optimistic that this piece of legislation will become law?
I am. very optimistic.
Representative Casey Tomlinson, Republican representing parts of Bucks County, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. Tomorrow on the PCN Capitol Preview, Kevin Harley of Quantum Communications and Britt Crampsey of Britt Crampsey Communications join us to talk more about issues before the legislature. That's tomorrow morning starting at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.